Hello, everyone. I was muted, so I apologize for that. Just wanted to thank you for joining our discussion today on data interoperability and also how we can accelerate your digital transformation. Just wanted to give you a heads up, this webinar is being recorded. And my name is Katie Fenton. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Systems here at Kyra Solutions. And before joining Kyra, I served in a variety of capacities with the state. I was a former deputy secretary, and when I was there, I managed a broad range of public policy and initiatives, and we utilized and relied on large amounts of data. That data provided transparency that was expected by our constituency, and so I'm excited to serve as the moderator for today's discussion. First, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. With us today is Barry Palateri. Barry is a former state CIO, and he now serves as Kyra's Chief Strategy Officer. Barry helped government agencies in their path towards digital transformation, and he also has a lot of great insights to share. He continues to provide execution guidance and innovative leadership for us here at Kyra. Welcome, Barry.
Thank you, Katie. Appreciate it. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks. We also have Shad Imam. He is the Director of Solution Engineering for the public sector at MuleSoft. Shad leads the public sector solutions engineering team, and they're making significant impacts for government. They help connect on-prem and cloud-based applications and data using MuleSoft's unique API-led approach. Welcome, Shad.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
We also have with us Will Thompson. Will is the Deputy Executive Director at the Florida Prepaid College Board. Will advocates for customer-centric solutions that help families save for college and disability expenses. He leads the strategy and execution for technology investments for his agency. And I can personally say I've seen Will's leadership firsthand, and he and his team are doing a phenomenal job for the Florida Prepaid College Savings Program, as well as the state of Florida. So we're happy to have Will with us today.
Thank you, Katie.
Today, we're going to cover a range of topics that will empower agencies to connect and modernize your enterprise solutions seamlessly. These things include I practiced this word several times before this webinar, and of course, interoperability inside and outside of the agency. We'll also talk about unlocking data, breaking down silos, simplifying API integration, accelerating modernization efforts, and all with a goal of faster results. Before I turn it over to Shad, I wanted to bring up some housekeeping items. As I mentioned earlier, this event is being recorded and will be made available for you to watch later. We are also live streaming this on Kyra's Facebook page, so you can follow us on Facebook and watch it there, and you can also share it with any of your colleagues that weren't able to make it today. I wanted to ask everyone to mute your mic. If you're not muted already, please do so now. Of course, our speakers, we don't want you to mute yourselves, so please keep your mics open. Also, if you have questions, please put them in the QA box that's provided, the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And as time permits, we're going to do our best to answer any questions, and we'll also have a live Q&A session at the end. Okay, let's get started. Shad's going to open us up with an introduction on how tools like MuleSoft unlock data and enable interoperability. Shad?
All right, thank you guys. Can someone just confirm that they can hear me and see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah, oh, perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kyra. Thank you, everyone, for allowing us to be here today. As Katie mentioned, my name is Shad Imam. I am the Director of Sales Engineering here for the public sector at MuleSoft. And over the past 2 decades, have really worked with countless government agencies to help in their transformation efforts. I joined MuleSoft about 3 years ago because I was intrigued by the amount of work that was being done in the integration space in particular, and what that meant for our customers, and how this whole idea of digital transformation could really help bring forth the best within an organization when approached strategically from an enterprise perspective. So for today, I want to just discuss a little bit with all of you before we get into the panel discussion about why is there a need for change? What is really the impetus driving this change within our organization? So as you all know, and this is, everybody who's worked within government, especially over the last few decades, you know that every organization is undergoing change. Government is no different, right? So whether we're looking in the industry with financial services or retail, there's increasingly newer ways in which consumers are able to really consume the different products that are out there, and our citizens are expecting much the same. And that's what we've seen as we've polled and worked with organizations over the last few years, is that really there's three major buckets of initiatives that the public sector faces in terms of disruption. Number one is infrastructure modernization. This is something that's become very core to many of our government centers have infrastructure that's aging. It's old. We're talking decades, if not half a century old in some cases, especially in the federal agencies. And there's this drive to say, you know what, I'd love to be able to create a mobile application, but I can't on software that was designed never to assume a mobile application, right, in decades past. In the same way, there's greater citizen expectations now. We have, the ways in which our citizens are able to engage with our technology. It goes beyond just logging into a online portal or calling up somebody on a phone, right? And so there's also automation of civil services that are increasingly becoming more and more relevant, right? Many of us no longer want to go into a DMV and stand there in line for hours to update our driver's license or to get a new passport or what have you. So there's this increasing push to have automation of these civil services that our government agencies have to provide. But the reality is, and this is a reality that you and I face on a daily basis, is that these transformations are not easy. There's legacy infrastructure involved, data silos across all kinds of different software and applications, disconnected consumer experience or customer or citizen experiences, inaccurate data. Now in the cloud world, we've got multiple types of cloud vendors that are oftentimes involved. And then of course there's compliance, whether you're in Europe and there's GDPR, or you're in the States and there's FedRAMP and soon to becoming StateRAMP as well. These different compliance and authorization mechanisms are all ways in which government's trying to make sure that the information that is within data centers and outside of data centers is secure, and that our citizens can trust that organization with their data. But oftentimes getting access to that data is a non-trivial task. And what do I mean by that? We've done research to show that the average customer interaction crosses 35 different systems from request to response, right? So what that means is that they're traversing, that request is traversing an entire enterprise architecture in play here. And oftentimes that enterprise architecture consists of not just one homogeneous data store. It's not just one database, but it's a series of applications and databases that have to be traversed in order to get that information, right? So the processes and the data involved is oftentimes very highly fragmented. And what we've seen is that these traditional approaches to addressing things like combating fraud and abuse, Citizen 360, modernization efforts, it's all done via point-to-point connections. And so these point-to-point connections have proven themselves over time now to be very brittle, right? Somebody who may have designed that code 10 years ago has left the organization, and the organization or the agency now has to deal with the repercussions of that stale code. It also becomes a bottleneck. If I want to design a mobile application or an online portal or online application, I have to figure out where is the data, where does it reside within my enterprise in order for me to access it. And then it becomes very rigid. What do I mean by that? It's not very adaptable to change. So our citizens, along with our IT practitioners, are all seeing the problem here. They're saying that, hey, this point-to-point mess is really hard to extricate from. How do we remove ourselves from this situation or remove the data that we need from this situation? Well, I'd like to start off with an analogy. Because oftentimes when I'm working with government agencies, they respond back and say, well, look, I do this the easiest way that I can. It's writing point-to-point code and it gets the job done. And the reality is that, I remember as a child going on camping trips. And let me just describe to you what our camping trips oftentimes consisted of. Well, it consisted of a day planner, right? I had to make sure that I had a plan as to how I was going to get to the campsite. When I got older, well, in order to communicate, we had to have a pager. If my kids were involved in the situation, or this actually, I can't say this for my kids anymore because they have fancy new switches that have all kinds of color involved. Anybody who remembers what this was will remember this was a Game Boy. This is an old school Nintendo device that we used to use for our entertainment, right? And we used to have flip phones once upon a time. And I would take a camera with me on the trip so that I could take pictures. I'd have, if I were really advanced, I might have an MP3 player. If I needed information about the site that I was visiting, I'd have to pick up a newspaper or, heaven forbid, have to take the entire Encyclopedia Britannica with me, right? Just to get information about that campsite. And then for entertainment, I would need money. I'd have to make sure there was a TV. And finally, I'd need to take maps with me. Who remembers maps? I remember actually stopping off at gas stations there you go, Barry. Thank you very much, right? Remember actually buying maps to see, are we on the right highway? Well, yes, I could do all of this independently of each other and complete my trip. But today, when you and I head out, we just use one of these. We just have a phone, a smartphone that allows us to do all of that we used to be able to do in disparate systems before. Because that simplicity of that phone, that smartphone, has now lent itself to higher productivity. Well, our enterprise architectures within government are like doing it all on our own, piecing it all together, piecing that entire trip together. So we've got different standards, we've got different technologies, we've got different methodologies that are all up here together, and we're trying to piecemeal that all together. Well, whereas instead what we should be looking at doing is, how can I do this more efficiently? Can I put a platform in place, like my phone has a platform for applications to be able to talk to each other? Can I put a platform like that in place for my entire enterprise? A unified platform for everyone. And why do we need this? Because our delivery capacity from an IT perspective hasn't changed much over the years. There's a lot of research that shows that it simply has not changed much over the years. But there are now competing demands for that delivery capacity. Cloud-based initiatives, SaaS initiatives, mobile, IoT, AI now, business demands, they're all coming out. And what our IT departments are saying is, hey guys, we have a delivery gap. I cannot do innovation and continue to furnish out the reports and all of the things that you need me to do on a daily basis without this gap increasing over time. So modern businesses need a new approach. And this approach is something that allows IT enterprises to be treated like composable building blocks. If they are made up of composable building blocks, these building blocks can then become the modernization of the future. And I'll show you what that means in just a minute. Because what we have to understand first is, when I have data within my enterprise, if the IT department is the only one responsible for the stewardship of that data, then I become a bottleneck as part of IT. But under a new operating model, if I can enable my lines of business to use the data as assets within their organization, now all of a sudden I can bifurcate the innovation from the maintenance, right? And we'll look at what this means in a minute. But essentially what we're doing now under this new operating model is franchising out the data, allowing that data to be standardized and accessed in a way that the lines of business within our government agency are able to consume it in the way that they need, not the way that we would dictate they have to use. And so this operating model emphasizes not just the production of IT assets and data APIs, but also the consumption of them. So this is kind of a symbiotic relationship. It's a virtuous cycle of goodness between an interaction between the consumers of that data and the producers of that data. And what we've seen is that over the last 5 years in particular, but really since the last decade, APIs have now emerged as this consumable building block. Application programming interfaces are nothing new. They've been there for a decade plus. But what we're seeing is increasingly now organizations are using APIs as the connective tissue to go between the organization, to connect between the data and the devices within that organization, right? And these APIs are not just connection points the way our point-to-point connections were, but they can be standardized, they can be productized, they can be secured, right? All of these things that we would need for any product now can come together as one within these standard building blocks. And so I want to just take a minute here to focus on what this gives us as an organization. These at the bottom here, we've got systems of record. These could be government systems of record, they could be databases, they could be applications. This is where, I was an Oracle DBA for many years in a prior life. And I remember the worst thing you could tell me as an Oracle DBA was, hey guys, it's time for an upgrade. Right? I was like, oh no, I gotta pull my hair out now, whatever hair I've left, right? It's like, oh, I gotta bring the whole system down in order to do this upgrade. And it was mortifying, right? Because as a system administrator, I'm only interested in I'm really interested in maintaining the status quo. That's all I'm interested in at the end of the day. Now, when it comes to developers at the top, these are the individuals who are constantly developing new systems and new records and new, think about all the applications on your phone, right? All the applications on our phones, they're constantly getting updated because the developers up here are interested in change as often as possible, whereas the administrators down here are interested in change never, right? So how do you address what Gartner calls the problem of bimodal IT? IT that has to run at two different speeds, the speed of changing all the time at the developer level and the speed of consistency and no change at the administration level. The only way you can do that is by abstracting the information that's needed from the systems and giving that access to those developers. And that's what we call an API-led approach to connectivity. So APIs can be used to extract the information in a standardized fashion. So now my developers no longer have to know Oracle PLSQL. They no longer have to know SAP PI. They no longer have to know whatever language, Java, native Java that this homegrown application is written in. All they need to know is, can I access this API in a standard fashion via RESTful services or what have you, right? This model changes really the onus and also the innovation from occurring just at the bottom layer here to occurring throughout the enterprise. And that's what we've seen with the customers that we've been working with. When we have seen consistently that driving value with this new approach means that organizations historically now, and I've been working here again for 3+ years, but MuleSoft in general has been working with organizations for over a decade now, and we've seen that there's a 60% improvement in speed with organizations that use this approach. They're able to deliver faster on those projects that they have coming down the pipe. They're able to run more efficiently, right? Especially in terms of this symbiotic relationship between the developer and the consumer of that particular API or of that data. And then over time, they're able to dramatically lower their costs. And I'll share with you just one story about what that cost saving looks like. So all of this happens, right, and can happen with using a unified platform like MuleSoft. And we've done this, as I said, consistently with our customers over and over again. So what MuleSoft does is not just offer up a robust platform, but also an approach and a methodology that help our customers really unlock the data in their enterprises and start to innovate much quicker and much faster, something that is of dire need to our government agencies all across the US and federal markets. And as proof of kind of the investment that MuleSoft has put forth for government agencies in particular, is we're actually the only unified API and iPaaS platform that's FedRAMP authorized. And again, soon to be hopefully StateRAMP authorized as well, right? Which means that government agencies can rely on the compliance from a FIPS 140-2 perspective. They know that security is embedded by default, and really security is core to and compliance is core to the overall offering that we have as part of the platform. And the benefits of that platform really are condensed into 4 major buckets. We've already discussed 3 of them. Accelerated delivery, right, with that 65% faster delivery time. Automated security, embedding security by default within the APIs themselves. And then resiliency in operations, right? Building in that reliability and that scalability and that visibility within your organization. But it's this 4th bullet here that I think is really the game changer for our government agencies. And that's laying in a future-proof foundation. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you want to make sure that any integration platform you put in today is not throwaway technology 2 or 3 years from now, that it can consume whatever new technologies will be coming out in the future, something that you and I cannot predict, right? And so we want to put a platform in place today that allows for that connectivity, and that connective tissue has now become APIs that can allow for that API to be managed, developed, deployed, all from a central location. So you want to make sure that you're future-proofing your enterprise for anything else that happens in the future. And to do that, we've actually proven ourselves as a leader now in not just one area, but in 2 within Gartner's quadrants, right? So integration platform as a service, as well as full lifecycle API management, right? Where we have leapfrogged the company. We're actually the only, if you look at the quadrants here, we're actually the only one that's in both of these quadrants. The competitors in both of these quadrants are different because these technologies grew up independently. But at MuleSoft, we really believe that a unified approach is what's going to help our organizations excel to the next level. Now, if I've got a few minutes here, I want to actually just share a couple of really cool customer stories, and I think hopefully everybody will see what this means in action. I've shared some of the theory. What's this look like in action now? So I'm going to start off with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. I'm not sure how many people have worked at the Department of Agriculture in the past, but this is actually a massive government agency that has 29 sub-agencies within it, all of which were completely disparate, right? Their own IT shops, their own CIOs, their own everything. And about 4 years ago, they embarked on this journey to combine the user experience and the admin experience for USDA to be literally, it was an initiative called One USDA, combining these 29 different systems into one so that we have people who are using those systems, they have a standardized, unified experience. And we worked, iteratively with the Department of Agriculture to really build out an API-led strategy for them. And I'll just give you one example. They had a relocation project that was extracting data from a financial management system that was based on SAP. And to extract that data, they told us cost them $150,000 per interface prior to this particular initiative. Now, what that meant was every time that there was a change in address for somebody who was residing in a different country, it was a non-trivial task to actually change that address within the system and get them a new paycheck in that new country across the system. That would be at least $150,000 per interface and up to 18 months in development. We worked with them to develop one relocation API that was built on standardized data that was being extracted from these different systems of record. That relocation API was built in 3 months. And then immediately, the MLinks project came on board and said, hey, we need to use this relocation API. Well, instead of having to connect directly to the SAP systems, what they did was just use the relocation API. And from the 3 months that it took to develop this system, this application came online in 6 weeks. The next application was actually a mobile application that said, hey, guess what? We want to do the same thing, except instead of having to connect to the underlying systems independently, we're going to use that same relocation API. Well, that project then came on board within a matter of 3 weeks. And then there was a separate Pega project that said, hey, you guys have already built APIs on top of these systems. Can I use that API to connect to a grants management system from grants.gov? And this project was then came on within a matter of just a few weeks. So here, because of the reusability of the underlying assets, you have this massive, increase in development time and time to market for our customers. And it was interestingly enough for me was the fact that the Department of State actually also gets paid from this exact same system, and they also have employees that are in other states and said, hey, we need to actually access that system too. Can we just use your relocation API? And they were able to build their own system. Now you don't just have intra-agency reusability, but we saw the first case of inter-agency reusability with these APIs. And again, we did this in an iterative fashion. So the first project was just relocation, the web API. The second project was then, hey, we can use a mobile API and build on top of the assets we've already created, and then even build into the future for the State Department OMS API. What I want to share here, though, is that over time, now the Department of Agriculture has realized over $5 million in savings. Remember that $150,000 per interface? You iterate that over and over again across multiple projects, and you have realized cost savings upwards of $5 million. This is just one example. We also have a second example, and this is the last one that I'll share, is with the Tennessee Valley Authority, which many people don't realize is actually a federal agency, right? Because it says Tennessee Valley in its name. But it's a federally owned power utility that provides electricity to over, I believe that's actually over 12 million people now in 7 southeastern states. Right now, they had an integration platform that needed to be in place to do outage planning, monitoring miles for transmission lines, paycheck processing for TVA workforce. In fact, they actually had a mobile application that they wanted to be able to, they had IoT sensors within their rivers and reservoirs so that they could let citizens know this is a good time to go fishing or a good time to go boating, a good time to go be out in the water, right? And their systems were so archaic that they weren't able to build those efficiently. So what they did was work with MuleSoft to say, hey, can you provide us with a platform that's going to be an integrated, unified platform to allow for these different integration points from IoT and what have you? And over time, what TVA has done is replace actually 3 other technologies, TIBCO, Akana, and Informatica over time with one standardized unified platform with MuleSoft. And again, it's not just about the platform for those that are listening, but it's also about the approach, right? And that approach is that API-led connectivity approach, whereby you're franchising the data assets out and allowing others to take advantage of that. So again, I want to just, we can kind of stop here as far as the presentation goes. I just want to let you all know that it's been a fantastic opportunity to work with so many of our government customers to help them and really see the fruition, or see this digital transformation effort come into fruition. What we have found oftentimes is that digital transformation is not just about having a new portal in place or a new web application. It's about making sure that all of our underlying systems are modernized and usable for our new initiatives. So Katie, that's it for my piece. I think I got that within 20 minutes, hopefully. But if there's anything else, we can go ahead and open it up now.
Thank you, Shad. Yeah, that was very informative. I found the fact that integration is a lot of times the number one reason why system solutions, bringing solutions in, fail was very eye-opening to me. And I think a lot of times it's an afterthought, and so it's good to see the API-led strategic approach on the front end. I know, Will, you are going through a lot of this right now, and the Florida Prepaid College Board has billions of dollars in assets under management under your leadership, and that equates to a lot of data. And so I was curious how the API-led approach that you guys are working on has allowed you to ensure that your outcomes are met and that the legacy data that you have is not slowing you down.
Well, I think that's an interesting point on the legacy. And Shad, thank you very much for covering a lot of those topics, because one thing is the idea of operations and IT working together is so important. And I'll give a perfect example. API is making things easier, but we found we need to go to some root issues even before some of the API layering approach. So because we didn't necessarily have all that infrastructure of that communication, what you had was multiple legacy systems. So we're ending up with data appearing multiple times. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call are used to that. It's like, wait, I have the email how many different times and how many different databases? And what you end up doing is creating another database that works as a master database to upload and update all the other databases. So what I think is really important, and I'm sharing kind of an operations side of this, is making sure that you have the right foundation that you're wanting to connect API-wise. So you don't want to necessarily just hook everything up and have 34 different versions of your email, and you're just, hey, I have API. There's connecting, but it needs to make sense. So is your data in a good position? What's your core data? What's that core system? And in some cases, I know there's a lot of groups that are looking at, hey, can I work on the same platforms I had before? If the answer is yes, API is a great option. Or if you can't afford to move off that system, that API can open up a wide variety of areas. But as you start looking and integrating, whether it's with MuleSoft, which we're utilizing, or a variety of other partners, what software are you using? Don't try to fight the software either. So understand what the data is that you want to connect, what systems you ultimately want to use, and then having something that's a little bit more flexible rather than the hard code connections is key. So that's what we're evaluating. Where are some good opportunities to utilize API, both for internal purposes and also external purposes as we're connecting with service providers. So I know we'll jump in more, but that was just at a high level, kind of our approach where we had to look not just at how we connect, because that was probably too easy. It was going back and really looking at our data, being willing to change our processes based on the systems we use, and then looking at how we're going to connect. And I think API is a great option for a variety of connections of data internally and externally.
Yeah, I agree. And just knowing, the work that y'all have been doing, I think, one of the things we've been seeing is that there's less concern on the integration piece. We're able to focus on the innovation, like Shad had mentioned in his presentation, because of the API-led approach and the planning that's going into it, and that proactive strategic strategy that we're enforcing from the beginning, understanding the importance of it. It's not something that's slowing us down, and it's not something that we have to worry about. So there's psychological safety in that, knowing that that's taken care of, and we also can move forward. We know that the data is going to be there when we need it. We're not going to have to pause everything and focus on that integration piece. So I appreciate that. Barry, I was curious, can you share some of your just past experience on the traditional ways that you have seen integration done across systems and across enterprises, and some of the considerations and challenges that you found to be important as a former CIO?
Absolutely, Katie. And challenge is the right word. Obviously, it's I'll start with the fact that when beginning anything like this, every organization is different. It's not greenfield. If it was greenfield, it'd be nice. Just start to build and do things. Everybody has a completely different snapshot, software portfolio. And I can tell you, we used to have a standing joke in a way, where if you could look at the software portfolio, you would come within 90% of drawing the org chart without knowing the organization. That used to be a standard because things were purpose-built, they were vertical and deep, and the concept of horizontal was a secondary thought that oftentimes came up later, right? So whether you were sharing data through traditional ETL processes or going backwards into some of the former service bus technologies that were there, they would work to a degree internally. But what you're hearing from Shad and Will is that there's a complete shift now, and I'll jump just quickly up to the strategy level, where when strategies are being built for organizations right now, they're built from a perspective of an ever-changing group of pieces, people, organizations, product, services, competitors, others are all assembled in different ways to create a product or a service now. So when Shad mentions about, so much per interface or whatever, we're talking about, that's a core competency now. It's not a luxury anymore, right? So on one end of it, it's driving the business forward with new services and products. On the other end, it's attempting to clean up and get a handle on total cost of ownership for the software portfolio. But I would just look at it as, and I think I mentioned this some time back, there are no boundaries anymore, right? So if you start by thinking that there's a boundary somewhere, whether it's a device, a person, a location, a facility, and government organizations, and I know from the one that I worked for, have or had for the longest time a facilities-based mentality, which there was nothing wrong with that. Run them, control them, build them, use them everywhere. And at this stage of the game, because the demands are coming from a fairly diverse consumer population, you can't build from the ground up every time. So some of it is going to be repurposing, some of it is going to be enhancing the value of the data you already have. And a big piece of it is meeting the customer where they already are. They're already there. They have a device. They experience in their daily lives consuming data, services, and buying products. And the expectation is you're going to meet them right there, if not exceed it. Right? So no longer a luxury. And one last comment, and Sean, I think you mentioned like 150,000 an interface or so, if that was the number. This, that I can testify, believe me, at least that in some cases. But this isn't just building APIs. Again, I think, Will, you mentioned it, because you can. The efficiency in the ability to build these is, and I'll speak for some consumer-led businesses, there's a lot of trial and error in trying to target and getting consumer preferences correct. It doesn't mean that just because you came up with it, that it's going to work. So at 150,000 a pop or more, you can never be in a situation where your people will push and try, right? It'll never happen because the cost will overwhelm all of that. It's also extremely difficult to go to your board or to go to your finance team and get them to fund integration. What is this thing? It doesn't have features. It doesn't have service. Well, what is it? Why? That's not a project. I'm not going to fund that. I want something else. And it tends to slip lower and lower in the priority list. So just some thoughts there that, but there you heard the technical, the operational, and this is a bit of the strategic. You put them all together. I mean, if you're going to compete today, there's no choice. You have to move in this direction.
Katie, if I can
Katie,
just
can
add
I-
on, because I
Yeah,
think,
go for
Barry,
it.
that it's dead on for the strategy. And one of the challenges that we're facing is that so much more is able to be done with so many connections. And that's where it comes down to kind of a question. I can do it now, but should I? Where does that make sense? And I think we'll touch on that in a couple of different areas.
Yep.
But one thing that I emphasize with the team is, look, we want to build and pass. Don't build it for yourself. We need to build this so that someone else maintains it. You're going to go on to another project. Don't build and think, this is my work. This will be my domain, because that builds the silos. I want you to build, pass it to someone else who can maintain, and they can make it better. So that's really important. And it speaks to that common language. It doesn't do me any good if you can show off a particular area and do a lot of custom coding, and you've either gone against the system or now no one else can maintain it but you. So it's some of the silos in the mentality of how we approach it. And then similar to what Shad was saying for, how do you maintain that base layer and then build up to be able to leverage? We want to build good, solid components that can be reused. Don't fight the system. Don't reinvent the wheel. Build some good building blocks and then let others utilize it. They're going to appreciate it. We're going to recognize you. You don't have to build the whole stream. We want you to use the system. We want to use those core elements and allow us to reuse them over and over again. That's what helps keep the budget down so that we don't have to fight for as many dollars. If we can utilize a fewer blocks rather than 20 different applications doing, 20 different streams, processes to accomplish what could have been done with a few reusable blocks. So I just really wanted to emphasize that, build for someone else, not just for yourself. Make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel, that you're coming up with a good solid process that can be reutilized, and then reuse it as much as you can. That will make a much more efficient and faster production. Shad, that was a great example for the customers where you saw the amount of time. Someone spent 6 months, then it was 3 months, then it was 6 weeks, then it was 3 weeks. Then it becomes just kind of a standard rollout item. the more that we can offer that, the better customer experience. And given as much self-management that customers want, where they want to be able to perform the transactions at their convenience, we're going to use a lot of those same components. So having that mentality throughout, I think, is very, very beneficial.
And Will, I would add that when you mentioned about the full life cycle management, that is just emphasized. It's so critical having the utility and the ability to organize, store, and access for reuse, because just like any other technology, just because it's an API doesn't mean that you can't make a mess of it. Right? You can build too many, you cannot have it documented, you can do all that. And having that ability to library it and follow it and actually sunset certain things when they're no longer needed, just like anything else, that's critical. I was glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, no, Barry, and to your point, one of the questions I get a lot is, hey, what's your competition? Who's your competition? And I said, in our minds, our real competition is point-to-point code, right? Because that's the way organizations have done this integration thing in the past. And you can create the same mess with APIs. You can make them all point-to-point, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to have a methodology behind the technology, not just the tech. The tech is going to get you there, but only if you have the right strategic vision, to your point, and the right processes in place to operationalize it. Because otherwise, you don't want to recreate a modern point-to-point mess, right? That's what we're trying to avoid.
And there's a methodology at the strategic level now, and I compare it to supply chain. When you sit with senior leaders in a firm, their mind is, there's not a single limitation. They will take a service, a part, a person, an organization from anywhere in the world and try to cobble it together to create a new product or service. And they're not expecting that there's any limitations.
Correct.
Right? It's an ecosystem full of things that you can go get at, or some other data store that you never heard of before that enhances what you already have. So the expectation from IT, obviously, is that you can deliver on those things and you can do it quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and the demands, and I think everyone's kind of touched on this. The demands for the data are there. People don't care what part of the organization has what parts of the data. They just know what they need, and so having that customer-centric focus, knowing and understanding how your customers use and need the data, and also, when I was with the state, we had to provide a lot of reports to the legislature because of funding and various things, and we had a lot of great systems in place, but none of them talked to each other. So it was always that dreaded call when a legislature called and said, hey, do you, I need to know X, Y, and Z. And that legislator didn't care that, didn't know and shouldn't care that there were 4 different systems that contain that data. And it required an individual to spend lots of hours collecting it all and putting it all together. And in that also leaves a lot of room for error. And so, I've seen where, data silos when it comes to data and systems really gets in the way, but I've also seen opportunities where those bridges have been made, and it's a beautiful thing when those legacy systems can talk to each other and share data in the way that makes sense for the customers. And I think that multi-jurisdictional approach is really important, and it's a service that needs to be provided to constituencies today. And a tool like MuleSoft obviously gets us there, but we have to be careful with planning and strategy up front. And I think that gets overlooked a lot. So I wanted to ask Shad, why do you think that that the importance of this integration and this data sharing and an API-led approach does get overlooked and it can be sometimes an afterthought?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kitty. And I think oftentimes what happens is it's been treated as an afterthought because it was assumed that, oh, these applications will just work together, right? There's just a kind of I've bought this software, there should be some hooks. And if there's not, I'll just design those hooks via, again, point-to-point code. And that's what was traditionally done. And so what's happened is now we're dealing with decades later of that having happened. And the maintenance is brittle, it's a mess, it becomes very, very difficult. So increasingly, you know, when I talk to CIOs, I oftentimes talk about using integration as a differentiator, not using integration as a hey, this is a nice to have, we got to do it. It's not a got to do it anymore. It's if you don't do it, you're not only behind, your you know, lives could be lost, right? Depending on what area of the government that you're in. So it's becoming more and more essential as part of the not just the ecosystem, but the underpinning for the rest of the ecosystem. We have to have a good integration strategy and an integration approach, because without that, all these other pieces are going to fail. And I think it's just bringing that more to top of mind, where it's no longer something I just need to get done. It's without this, my entire organization will be turned upside down. I don't know, Barry or Will, if you guys have similar or dissimilar thoughts on that.
I think I would add similar thoughts in the consideration. I think we were so used to connecting in different ways, and it just changes the conversation with potential partners when you're looking at systems. So it's not just what you have today, it's where you're headed and where those options are on the table. So right now, with being able to offer more of an API library, our conversation with other partners that we really haven't started that dialogue with, right, that we want to be partners, it's now different, because now we can interact with their system without having to talk about the security or how we're going to connect. It's a different conversation and a faster conversation. It's going to be easier. It's less of an investment from both parties. So I do think it's a differentiator. Not everyone is showing up to the table with an ability to connect. And I think that's going to be key moving forward. Whether you want to provide something or you want something from another service provider, you're going to want an easy way to connect, so it's not a big hurdle to start that relationship.
And you know, Will, I think that's right. It's not a big hurdle. And the other part is you can start small. You'll get an argument sometimes that, oh, if I'm going to think of a platform or a major service like this, I have to understand where I'm going with this thing. It's got to pay for itself, all of that. But you can start small, and you can follow a rhythm. I know that I've used in the past where we call it start, stop, continue. And you know, we start something, we stop, we evaluate, we continue. It's pretty simple, but it just, especially when doing new things. And when the stop is done, there's evaluation and sharing, spreading the faith, and then continuing on. Because once again, there's so many, and Chad, you did this really well in laying out all the moving parts that could exist inside a software portfolio. I mean, if you ever try to step back and paint a picture to solve the whole problem at once, you'll spend the rest of your career talking about it. It reminds me of the days of data warehousing, where you would sit and map all this stuff out forever and nothing would ever get done. You have to have a way to get started small and continue to build. And even exit strategies for new technologies are important. It doesn't, you may go down a path where it doesn't work out. That's fine. You can pull that one back and start again. But I think approaching in small, manageable chunks, is the way to go, because you're going to have more and more partners and suppliers and others are going to be, if you're not there, just like you said, well, they're going to be coming to you to connect. Take a simple example of, one of the ones always in my head is McDonald's, right? And they went, I won't go into the whole story, but their recent connection with Uber Eats, right, for delivery. They completely believe in the fact that their food should be delivered in, whether they'll deal with in-store kiosks and all that stuff, but there's an exchange of information. Whereas another company like Domino's is saying, I'm not giving my data to anybody. I know how to use my data. I want to own it. I'm going to mine it. I'm going to find out what people want, and I'm going to handle delivery on my own using technology. And it's just, these are the models that with no boundaries whatsoever of who you may connect with. And Chad, I'll leave it here, but I know you touched security, and absolutely critical, because a lot of this is being done in the DMZ or on the edge, right? I mean, this is what's happening now. You can't process or put things in your DMZ or process on the edge unless you're convinced 100% with the security. So we're touching services and people with that design. It's very different than holding things behind multiple firewalls real tight and, you know, feeling more comfortable. So that security piece plays a huge role in the API world.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. And I would just say that like integration, security can't afford to be an afterthought. It needs to be absolutely central, top of mind for practitioners, for CIOs, for IT departments. It's no longer an afterthought, not when we have all of the attacks that, you know, we're seeing on a daily basis, unfortunately. We need to make sure it's top of mind. It's not an afterthought. It is absolutely critical that any new software, any new methodology we adopt, keeps security top of mind for how it's going to be layered into the enterprise.
Yes, and data in transit is obviously a vulnerable place to be, can be, which is why, you know, a company like MuleSoft, who has established such a strong security policy and is tried and tested, is, you know, a good approach to take. I find it interesting, Barry, with your, you know, with you pointing out that you don't have to start large. You can take kind of small steps and step through, you know, maybe develop the bigger strategy and then just start taking steps into the right direction. Will, I was curious how you see that process going for Florida Prepaid, and if you had any comments that could help the folks listening.
Sure. So one of the kind of mantras that we follow by is think big, right? You want to have a big picture. You don't have to know exactly what that's going to be, but you want to think big. You want to know generally where you're headed. Start small, scale quickly. That's just a general mantra that we follow by. So one thing that we're looking at is we want to interact with more financial advisors, right? Registered investment advisors, et cetera. Well, if you're familiar in the area, there's a ton of different softwares that they're working on. So the idea that I could go and do an end-to-end point type connection with them, I would be spending years. I'm going to have to be able to provide some form of library towards them, but I don't have to answer all the questions. Many financial advisors simply would be happy with even getting a duplicate account statement where they would just have some basic information that they could sit down periodically with their client and discuss. So there's a good, easy starting point. But from there, what if I were able to offer for trading capabilities, right? And we can build. But in general, I know where we want to head. I want to be able to interact with more Florida financial advisors. I know that I can build certain things to start that connection, start building aspects to start that communication. And then I can scale quickly once I've established some connections. So that's just one small example of something that's a little bit further out there for us that we're going to be building. But it just gives that kind of idea. Where do you want to go? Think big. What do you want to accomplish? And then what is the practical way to accomplish it? And that is a perfect example of an area where it's going to be via APIs. I cannot spend enough time hooking up with dozens and dozens of companies speaking with their specific code and trying to create specific tunnels. So I think that would be one area. Always happy to go through more examples, but you know, obviously very much agree with the strategy here.
Well, Will, you just outlined the business case of how you get integration funded right there. that's the way it's done. You know, I mean, you can't, it gets to a point where you can't ignore it, and the cost effectiveness overtakes everything. Yep.
Yeah, and it really makes what could be impossible very, very possible. So
yep,
it's been fun to see. I know we only have a few minutes left. Just wanted to make sure that there weren't any questions. So far, I don't believe I've seen any coming through. We've got a question. Eventually, infrastructure and systems will have to upgrade. How does using an abstraction layer help with that inevitability? Who wants to take a shot at that? Infrastructure and systems will have to upgrade. How does using an abstraction layer help with that?
I can start off and then pass it over to my colleagues here. What I've seen in particular, and so it's a great question because we get this all the time, which is, hey, I want to move to the cloud, but I can't do that tomorrow, right? I can't do it next month. I have to do it at my own pace. And so what we've done with organizations is say, look, we know that there's the idea of ripping and replacing technology is not feasible, especially for government agencies. There's just way too much data in there. So build APIs that are going to extract the information you need from those systems and actually help modernize them. And then what that does is give you the ability to modernize at your own pace. When you are ready for those cloud-based vendors, when you're ready for that infrastructure modernization, when you're ready for that upgrade, whatever it might be, you've already got the building blocks in place to allow that transition to happen smoothly, right? So it really buys organizations time to do it at their pace versus being told, hey, you need to do an upgrade over the weekend, and if the system breaks, too bad, right? It's a matter of doing it in a way that is methodical versus kind of holding a gun to your head, getting it done now. So it is inevitable that will happen. We need to make sure there's an integration layer in place, and especially a transformation layer in place that allows that transformation to happen and on a smooth basis. But I'd love to hear thoughts from Will and Barry on that as well.
So I think the approach, I 100% agree with the way that you said it. I think the approach is also key, depending on what if you're just implementing it. I'm not sure how much it really is going to help you if you're just doing it. However, one thing that we kind of played with, because we've done a variety of conversions of just moving over everything wholesale, is almost playing a game of Go Fish. What makes sense that you're actually doing. And what you might find is in your legacy systems, you're going to see where the duplication is. You're going to see what data you're actually utilizing that is your key data, that this is what I want to hold on to. This is the field. Here's the functionality. Here's the process. I think going through the exercise and taking advantage of it and really learning what is important to you, not that you're just taking and pulling everything to that layer, but if you go through and pull what makes sense to go there, it will make your transition much easier. Your data will be cleaner. You'll know what you want, the priorities, and you'll have opened up a lot of the thought process. So the approach, I think, really, really matters. It is a journey, and it's how you do the journey that determines how easy it will be to move on to the next legacy item or from the legacy system.
Yeah, these modernization efforts can be huge. They can be super risky, and because of that, they sometimes don't happen. And so Prashant had put in the comment box, we can't expect citizens to have to wait for an agency to upgrade infrastructure in order for them to get better and easier access to services, because it is a huge feat. So a tool like MuleSoft will help take some steps in the right direction and ease into that future state that's needed without
Katie,
the risk. Yes,
Katie,
Barry?
Will hit it right on the head that we know that, as far as the infrastructure goes, connecting to devices, equipment, even application, the connection point is not the issue. The data is the issue. And you can pull data from multiple places. There's a big effort oftentimes that's done for cleansing and enriching of that data, and then a new service comes out of that. So it's really tracking backwards when there's an upgrade as to what happens to the underlying data model and the specifics there, because if that changes radically in a application replacement or something like that, there's clearly an impact as you follow the API through to its end service, or there are multiple data sources that have been combined together, and that's why I think, Will, you're right. You just don't back up the truck and dump all the data because you can, right? You pick and choose what's critical for the service or the product, whatever you're creating, and you hold on to that. And then when there are upgrades or other things, some of those upgrades will have absolutely no impact at all, zero. They that's what the value of the abstraction layer is. But when a source data model changes, okay, you're going to go back to the drawing board and determine were any of those key elements modified, changed, adjusted, or have different meanings now than what they used to. So.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the panelists today. It's I know it's after 2:15, so I want to wrap it up. Want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did as well. If you enjoyed today's webinar, I encourage you to follow Kyra Solutions on our social media pages, or you can check out our website. We've got a lot of great upcoming events in the future, and look forward to hearing more and appreciate y'all's time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks,
Thanks,
Will.
y'all.
Thanks, Chad. Thank you.
Bye.
Very well. Thanks, Katie.